Echo 7. The camera saw what happened. Nobody can explain it.
The pump ran for 6 hours. By 8:31 on that Tuesday morning in March of 2020, a Shell truck stop on Interstate 40 at exit 70 in Amarillo, Texas, had dispensed 413 gallons of diesel into and around a red Kenworth T700 tractor parked at the commercial fueling lane. Roughly 50 of those gallons had gone into the truck's port fuel tank, the tank the driver had been filling. The other 363 gallons had run down the side of the tractor, pooled in the expansion joint between the pump island and the canopy foundation, and evaporated into the dry Texas pre-dawn air. The pump nozzle swung gently from the fuel port of the Kenworth, clipped into the autoflow position, still dispensing. The driver was not in the cab. The driver was not anywhere on the property. The driver was a 52-year-old long-haul trucker named Evan Chadwick, and at 2:16 in the morning, 3 cameras had caught him squeezing the nozzle handle and engaging the autoflow clip. At 2:16 and 21 seconds, the cameras showed him not standing at the truck. They would not show him again. Not then. Not later. Not ever. This is Echo 7. Before I go further, I owe you the architecture of this investigation. What follows comes from incident reports filed with 12 state highway patrol agencies, public records requests submitted to 12 county sheriff's offices spanning a corridor from the Tennessee Valley to the Pacific, and point-of-sale transaction logs obtained directly from the fuel retailers under subpoena cooperation arranged through the families of the subjects. The retailers include Shell, Chevron, Pilot Flying J, Love's Travel Stops, Wawa, 7-Eleven, Sheetz, BP, Circle K, Come and Go, TA Travel Centers, and Maverick. The fuel dispenser manufacturers are Gilbarco Veeder-Root, Wayne Fueling Systems, and Bennett Pump Company. The log files I refer to in this investigation are the pump cycle diagnostic records maintained by those dispenser systems, files that the dispenser service technicians read in the ordinary course of maintenance, files that are not typically reviewed by law enforcement, because law enforcement does not know to ask for them. Some names in this investigation have been altered. A majority of the families of the 12 subjects asked that identifying personal details be kept out of public documentation, because the cases remain open, and because a pattern investigation like this one tends to attract attention from parties the families would prefer to avoid. Where a name has been changed, the first name kept within the change is close to the original. The locations, the fuel retailers, the vehicle makes and models, the timestamps and the pump cycle data are unchanged. None of these 12 cases has been solved. None of these 12 subjects has been recovered. 12 people have disappeared from the fuel islands of major interstate exit gas stations in the United States between 2014 and 2023. The subjects range in age from 19 to 72. The subjects include long-haul truckers, overnight nurses coming off shift, a retired school district nurse, a mother of 3 driving home from her sister's house, a college student on a road trip, and a grandmother in an RV. The subjects have nothing in common that I have been able to identify. The locations are spread across 12 states. The common feature is the interstate exit. Every disappearance occurred within 2 miles of a major interstate off-ramp. Every disappearance occurred between 11 in the evening and 4 in the morning. Every disappearance occurred at a fuel island under functioning surveillance. Every disappearance occurred while the pump was actively dispensing fuel into the subject's vehicle. And in every one of the 12 cases, the pump cycle diagnostic log contains the same entry sequence at the moment of disappearance. I want to explain what that sequence is before the cases, because it will appear in every case file, and you should know what you are looking at. A modern fuel dispenser contains an embedded control unit that logs every physical interaction with the pump. When the customer lifts the nozzle from the cradle, the pump logs a nozzle activation event. When the customer inserts the nozzle into the fuel port of the vehicle, the pump cannot detect this directly, but it infers it from the pressure profile in the fuel line once the customer squeezes the handle. When the customer squeezes the handle, the pump logs a handle engagement event and begins dispensing fuel. If the customer sets the handle's auto flow clip, which is the small metal bar that holds the handle depressed without requiring constant hand pressure, the pump logs a continuous flow lock event. The pump will then dispense fuel until one of three things happens. The tank fills, and the automatic shutoff at the nozzle tip trips and cuts the flow. The customer manually releases the auto flow clip, or the transaction timeout expires and the pump shuts itself down. The pump does not log the customer putting the nozzle back in the cradle. That is because putting the nozzle back is not logged as a pump event. It is logged only as the absence of a handle engagement and the absence of a continuous flow lock. The pump knows when the nozzle is back in the cradle because a small magnetic sensor in the cradle detects its presence. The cradle sensor is a separate log. It logs nozzle cradle events. In every one of the 12 cases, the pump cycle diagnostic log shows the following sequence: nozzle activation, handle engagement, continuous flow lock. Then, at a specific interval between 3 seconds and 47 seconds later, the continuous flow lock is released. But the nozzle cradle sensor does not log a return event. The nozzle was not put back in the cradle, and the handle was not held depressed either because the handle engagement log does not continue. What happened in those 3 to 47 seconds is that someone or something released the clip that holds the handle in the autoflow position without either replacing the nozzle in the cradle or continuing to pump fuel by hand. The nozzle then continued dispensing fuel at the rate the clip had locked in. Because the clip being released does not stop the fuel flow by itself. What stops the fuel flow after the clip is released is the spring in the handle lifting the valve back to the closed position. But in every one of the 12 cases, the pump continued dispensing fuel for between 1 and 9 hours afterward, until the tank filled and the automatic shutoff tripped, which means the handle never returned to the closed position, which means the handle was held open by something other than the clip and other than a hand for the duration of the pump cycle. What held the handle open is not identifiable from the log. The handle, when recovered by the investigating agency, was in the closed position. Someone between the end of the pump cycle and the arrival of the investigators had closed the handle. Who closed the handle is also not identifiable. The camera footage from the fuel island in each of the 12 cases does not show a hand closing the handle. What the camera footage shows is the subject squeezing the handle, engaging the clip, and then not being on camera anymore. That is the signature. That is the thread. That is what connects the 12 cases. A physical, logged, recoverable record in the fuel dispenser infrastructure that the investigating agencies have never examined as a pattern, because the investigating agencies do not routinely request pump diagnostic data when they respond to a missing persons call at a gas station. I have requested it. I have received it. I have read it. In every one of the 12 cases, the signature is the same. The pump cycle is aborted in the same specific way, in a specific window of time, without a witness and without a mechanism that any fuel dispenser engineer has been able to explain to me. I want to tell you about Evan Chadwick first, because his case is the one I started with. His wife, Karen Chadwick, contacted me in the fall of 2022 through a mutual acquaintance who had been following my earlier investigations. Karen sent me a manila envelope containing the Randall County Sheriff's incident report, a printout of the Shell dispenser diagnostic log for pump number 4 at the Amarillo Exit 70 station, a CD of surveillance footage from the station's 5 cameras covering the fuel island, and a personal letter. I read the letter first. Karen wrote that Evan had been her husband for 29 years, that he had driven long haul for the past 18 of those 29 years, that he had logged approximately 3.7 million miles over the course of his career, had never been in an at-fault accident, and had stopped at that particular Shell station on Interstate 40 more than 200 times over the course of his career, because it sat at a convenient fueling point between his usual Dallas departure and his usual Denver delivery route. Evan knew the station. Evan knew the clerks. Evan knew the exit. Evan knew the approach roads. Evan had used that specific pump island hundreds of times. At 2:11 in the morning on Tuesday, March 10th, Evan pulled the Kenworth into the truck fueling lane. The camera covering the truck fueling lane captured him stopping the tractor, setting the air brakes, climbing down from the cab, and walking around to the fuel tank on the driver's side of the truck. The Kenworth T700 has dual fuel tanks, port and starboard, each holding approximately 120 gallons of diesel. Evan was not topping off the starboard tank. He was topping off the port tank only, which had approximately 50 gallons of remaining capacity based on his logged consumption rate from the previous refueling stop in Oklahoma. The fueling should have taken approximately 6 minutes. Evan had 6 minutes of driving time left in his regulated daily hour limit before he would be required to take a mandatory 10-hour rest break. He had planned to finish fueling, pull to the adjacent truck parking lot, and sleep for 10 hours before continuing west in the morning. His trip log showed this plan clearly. He had scheduled the Amarillo fueling stop as his last driving activity of the cycle. At 2:16 in the morning, Evan removed the pump nozzle from the cradle. The diagnostic log shows a nozzle activation event time-stamped to the second. Evan walked around to the driver's side of the tractor, inserted the nozzle into the port fuel tank, and squeezed the handle. The diagnostic log shows a handle engagement event 2 seconds later. 2 seconds is a realistic interval for a man to walk the 4 feet between the pump and the fuel port. At the handle engagement timestamp, the pump began dispensing diesel at the rate selected by the customer, which in this case was the pump's default commercial flow rate of approximately 7.5 gallons per minute. 4 seconds after handle engagement, Evan engaged the autoflow clip. The diagnostic log shows a continuous flow lock event. Evan was, at this point, standing at the side of his own tractor with his left hand on the fuel tank rim and his right hand hanging loose at his side, because the clip was doing the work of holding the handle. The camera covering the truck fueling lane captured this exact posture at 2:16 and 18 seconds. At 2:16 and 21 seconds, the camera lost the image. Not a glitch, not static. The camera shows Evan in the same posture. Then the next frame, recorded 1/30th of a second later, shows the empty space where Evan had been standing. The nozzle is still inserted in the tank. The handle is still locked in the flow position. The diesel is still dispensing at 7.5 gallons per minute. But Evan Chadwick is not on camera, and the pump cycle diagnostic log shows that 4 seconds after the camera stopped showing Evan, the continuous flow lock was released. The handle remained depressed. The cradle sensor did not register a nozzle return, and fuel continued flowing. For the next 6 hours and 14 minutes, diesel flowed from the Shell pump at Pump Island number 4 into and then alongside Evan Chadwick's port fuel tank. The tank's maximum capacity was approximately 120 gallons, of which 70 had already been in it when Evan began fueling. At 7.5 gallons per minute, the tank filled in approximately 6.7 minutes, and the automatic shutoff at the nozzle tip tripped, which should have cut the flow. The shutoff did trip. The diagnostic log shows the shutoff event, but the handle did not close. So diesel continued to flow past the closed valve at a reduced rate, approximately 1 gallon per minute, pushed by the pump's pressure system, spraying out around the now full tank's filler neck and down the side of the tractor to the concrete. The clerk inside the station, a 24-year-old named Cody, who was on his first overnight shift at that location, did not notice the first pump alarm when it triggered at approximately 3:14 in the morning. The Shell's tank alarm threshold at Pump 4 had been set at 100 gallons dispensed, a policy intended to flag unusually large fills for commercial fraud review. The alarm went off at 3:14. Cody silenced it from the cashier's console, as he had been trained to do by the store manager, who had told him that the alarm sometimes triggered for no reason, and he should just reset it. The alarm went off again at 4:09. Cody silenced it again. It went off a third time at 5:11, a fourth time at 6:20, and a fifth time at 7:56, when it hit the transaction maximum and the pump cut itself off at 413 gallons. Cody silenced every one of them. The store manager had not warned him that the alarm intervals were calibrated to rising dispense volumes. Cody did not look at the pump display. He did not walk outside. He did not go see what was happening at Pump 4. At 8:31 in the morning, a regional manager named Teresa arrived for the shift change inspection. She walked the lot. She saw the diesel pooling under the Kenworth. She walked into the cab. She saw Evan's wallet on the driver's seat. She ran back inside the store, unplugged the pump breaker, and called the Randall County Sheriff's Office. That is the first thing Karen Chadwick knew when the sheriff called her at 9:47 that morning. Her husband was missing. His tractor was at a Shell station in Amarillo. There were 413 gallons of diesel on the concrete. The pump had been running for 6 hours. No one knew where Evan had gone. Evan has not been found. The Randall County Sheriff's investigation lasted 13 months before the case was transferred to the cold case unit. The case remains open. Before I describe the other 11 cases, I want to explain why the pattern I just outlined wasn't visible to any of the investigating agencies until I assembled it. The reason is structural. A missing persons case at a gas station is investigated by the local sheriff or city police. The investigation focuses on the subject's last known movements, the subject's known associates, and the surveillance available at the scene. Surveillance means camera footage. Surveillance does not typically mean pump diagnostic logs. The pump diagnostic logs are not in the possession of the local law enforcement agency. The logs are in the possession of the fuel retailer's corporate maintenance department, which requests them from the dispenser manufacturer only when a pump needs service. The dispenser manufacturer stores them on its own servers. If an investigator wants those logs, the investigator has to know the logs exist, then identify the correct retailer, then identify the correct dispenser manufacturer, then submit a formal request with the correct file numbers. I have done this 12 times over the past 3 years. In 10 of the 12 cases, the investigating agency had not made any request for dispenser data. In 2 of the 12 cases, an investigator had requested the data, received it, not known what it meant, and filed it in the case folder without follow-up. The logs are consistent. Every one of them shows the same abort pattern. Before I move to the second case, I want to establish what this pattern is not. It is not an abduction by a human offender using the station as a target. I can prove that by reference to a case the investigating agency did solve. That case, which I include here for contrast, is not one of the 12. It is a reminder of what a solved fuel station abduction looks like, a reminder of what surveillance is supposed to catch, a reminder of what the pump logs are supposed to corroborate. On the 30th of April in 2013, a 31-year-old single mother named Jessica Hiringa was working the closing shift at an Exxon Mobil gas station on Sternberg Road in Norton Shores, Michigan. She was the only employee on duty. She had a 6-year-old son at home with a babysitter. She was scheduled to clock out at 11 in the evening. At approximately 10:50 in the evening, a silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan pulled behind the station, parked in the rear delivery lot, and a man got out. The man walked around the side of the building. A customer who drove past the station at 10:52 in the evening noticed that the minivan was parked in a location where delivery vehicles parked, but it was not a delivery vehicle, and there was no driver visible. The customer noted the partial license plate and the color. When Jessica's relief arrived at 11 and found the station unlocked, the till open, a small blood drop on the floor behind the counter, and Jessica's phone and purse still in the back office, the relief called 911. The Norton Shores Police responded within 6 minutes. The Norton Shores Police did everything right. They pulled surveillance from the Exxon's interior cameras, which captured Jessica working the register up until approximately 10:54. They pulled surveillance from the convenience store's exterior cameras. They canvassed the neighborhood. They identified the silver minivan from the passing customer's description. They tracked the minivan's movements across the following month through traffic cameras at Muskegon County intersections. They built a profile. They identified a suspect, a man named Jeffrey Willis, a 45-year-old local resident who owned a silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan, and who had, in the intervening months between Jessica's disappearance and the close of the investigation, murdered a second woman and attempted to abduct a third. Willis was arrested in 2016. convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and attempted kidnapping, and sentenced to life without parole. Jessica's body has not been recovered. Willis has not disclosed the location, but the case is, in every investigative sense, closed. The offender is identified. The offender is convicted. The offender is in prison. The family has at least a name to attach to the absence. I include Jessica's case because her Exxon station had a fuel dispenser maintained by Gilbarco Vita Root. Her station's pump logs are available. Her station's pump logs show ordinary use throughout the evening of April 30th, 2013. No aborted cycles. No handle engagement events followed by continuous flowlock releases without cradle returns. The pumps at the Norton Shores Exxon worked the way pumps are supposed to work on a night when a crime was committed by a human offender who approached the station, entered the store, abducted the clerk, and left. The surveillance captured the offender's approach, his vehicle, his movement patterns, and enough information to build a case that led to conviction. The pump logs recorded routine refueling activity. The 2 sets of data are independent. They do not need to correlate because the crime did not involve the pumps. This is what a normal gas station abduction looks like: an offender, a vehicle, a physical approach, a surveillance trail, a recoverable pattern in the evidence. Now consider the 12 other cases where surveillance captures the subject arriving at the fuel island, engaging the pump, and then not appearing on any camera afterward, where the pump logs show the aborted cycle signature, where no vehicle approaches or leaves the fuel island in the relevant interval, where no witness on the property saw anything, where the clerks inside the store continued their ordinary duties, unaware that anything had happened, for between 40 minutes and 7 hours, where the only indication that something had occurred at all was the eventual alarm from the pump, triggered by the tank overflow, answered by a store employee who had been trained to reset the alarm rather than investigate its cause. This is not a comparison of solved versus unsolved cases. It is a comparison of events that leave behind the expected evidence trail versus events that leave behind a pump log anomaly that nobody in the relevant chain of custody knows to look for. The second subject I want to describe is a 64-year-old retired school district nurse named Margaret Ellison, who disappeared from the Chevron station at exit 198 on Interstate 40 in Flagstaff, Arizona, on a Tuesday evening in September of 2019 at 11:23 in the evening. Margaret had been driving home from a 3-day visit with her daughter and 2 grandchildren in Gallup, New Mexico. The drive from Gallup to her home in Prescott, Arizona, is approximately 230 miles and takes under 4 hours. Margaret had left Gallup at 7:45 in the evening, intending to be home by midnight. She had called her husband Walter from the Chevron at 11:19 to tell him that she was stopping for gas and would be home in about an hour and a half. Walter was watching a recorded Arizona Diamondbacks game and asked her to drive carefully. She said she would. She said she loved him. She said goodbye. That was the last conversation anyone in Margaret's family had with her. Margaret was driving a 2017 Toyota Camry in a color Toyota calls Ruby Flare Pearl. She had purchased the car new from a dealership in Prescott 3 years earlier. She had driven it 97,000 miles. She kept the interior immaculate. She kept the glove box organized. She kept a folded Arizona Road Atlas in the door pocket. She kept a small first aid kit and a flashlight in the center console. She kept her purse, her phone, and her travel documents in the passenger seat. Everything about Margaret's approach to driving was methodical. She had learned to drive at 17 and had, in 47 years of driving, been in exactly 1 accident, a parking lot fender bender in 1996 for which she had not been at fault. The Flagstaff Chevron is a 4-pump island station located 1/4 mile south of the Interstate 40 exit. The station's fuel dispensers are Wayne Ovation units installed in 2015. The station has 6 cameras. 2 cover the fuel island, 1 covers the store interior, 1 covers the cashier's console, 1 covers the parking area adjacent to the store, and 1 covers the approach driveway from the exit ramp. At 11:22 in the evening, The approach driveway camera captured Margaret's Camry pulling into the station. At 11:22 and 40 seconds, the fuel island camera captured her parking at pump number 2, exiting the driver's side and walking to the pump. At 11:23 and 14 seconds, she lifted the nozzle. At 11:23 and 21 seconds, she inserted the nozzle into the fuel port and squeezed the handle. The pump log shows the handle engagement event at that timestamp. At 11:23 and 25 seconds, she engaged the autoflow clip and stepped back slightly to look at the pump's digital display. The fuel island camera captured this posture. She was wearing a lavender cardigan over a white blouse, dark slacks, and comfortable driving shoes. Her hair was short, silver, and neatly combed. At 11:23 and 29 seconds, the camera image shifted. Margaret was no longer in the frame. The camera showed the Camry, the pump, and the empty space where Margaret had been standing. The nozzle continued dispensing fuel. The clip held the handle. 4 seconds later, the pump log registered a clip release event without a subsequent handle engagement and without a cradle return event. The pump continued dispensing at the rate of approximately 4 gallons per minute, the flow rate of the passenger car pump at that station, which is slower than the commercial pump Evan Chadwick had used. The Camry's fuel tank capacity was 16 gallons. Margaret had started the fueling with approximately 2 gallons remaining, based on her trip log. The tank filled in 3.5 minutes. The automatic shutoff at the nozzle tip tripped at 11:26 and 58 seconds. The pump continued attempting to dispense at the reduced overflow rate until the transaction timeout expired at 11:53 in the evening. During those 27 minutes, approximately 8 gallons of unleaded gasoline poured from the Camry's overflowing fuel port down the side of the vehicle and onto the concrete pad. The clerk inside the Chevron, a 20-year-old named Kyle, who was alone on the overnight shift, did not notice the pump alarm. The Wayne Ovation dispensers at the Flagstaff Chevron were set to alarm at the transaction maximum dollar amount, which was $50 for unleaded. Margaret had not reached $50. The pump ran, the fuel overflowed, the transaction timed out at 11:53, and the pump shut itself down. Kyle noticed the Camry sitting at pump 2 at 12:14 in the morning when he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. He noticed the fuel on the concrete. He looked inside the car. He saw the purse on the passenger seat, the phone face down on top of the purse, and the driver's side door wide open. He did not see Margaret. He did not see anyone in the store or in the parking area. He went back inside and called 911. Walter Ellison was called at 12:47 in the morning by the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. He was told that his wife's car had been found abandoned at a Chevron station in Flagstaff, with her personal effects inside, and that Margaret could not be located. Walter had been asleep in front of the television. He told the dispatcher that Margaret had called him from that station an hour and a half earlier. He told her he would drive to Flagstaff immediately. The dispatcher told him the drive was over 2 hours. She told him to wait until morning. Walter did not wait. He arrived at the Chevron station at approximately 2:40 in the morning. By that point, the sheriff's deputies had cordoned off the fuel island, photographed the vehicle, begun interviewing the overnight clerk, and pulled the initial round of surveillance footage. Walter watched the footage on a sheriff's laptop in the station's back office. He watched his wife pull into the station, park at the pump, lift the nozzle, engage the clip, and disappear between one frame and the next. He asked the deputy to replay the footage. The deputy replayed it. Walter watched it 3 more times. He asked the deputy whether any other camera at the station had captured Margaret after the fuel island frame went blank. The deputy had already checked. The interior store camera had not captured her entering the store. The cashier's camera had not captured her approaching the counter. The parking area camera had not captured her walking to the parking area. The approach driveway camera had not captured her leaving. No camera on the property had captured Margaret after 11:23 and 29 seconds. Walter asked where she could have gone. The deputy said he did not know. Margaret has been missing for 7 years. The Coconino County Sheriff's investigation was joined by the Arizona Department of Public Safety and the FBI within 48 hours. The Flagstaff police assisted with the local canvass. The case attracted regional news coverage for 2 weeks, during which the Chevron station's business dropped by approximately 70%, recovering slowly over the following 6 months. A reward of $25,000 was offered for information leading to Margaret's location. No information meeting the threshold of the reward was received. A second reward of $50,000 was offered 6 months later. No information was received. In 2021, 2 years after Margaret's disappearance, the case was transferred to the Arizona Cold Case Unit. The pump log for pump number 2 at the Flagstaff Chevron, obtained by me through a direct request to Wayne Fueling Systems in the fall of 2022, shows the abort signature, the clip release without cradle return, the continued dispensing, the transaction timeout. Everything that should not be possible at a pump where the customer had simply walked away for a moment, because in that case, the pump would either continue dispensing until manually stopped or hit the automatic shutoff and then still be flowing at reduced rate until someone returned to the handle. Nothing in the pump's engineering accounts for what the log shows. I sent the log to a Wayne Fueling Systems field engineer in Houston for a second opinion. He confirmed the anomaly and stated, off the record, that the pattern was not reproducible in any failure mode the manufacturer had documented. In his 14 years at the company, he estimated he had seen approximately 200 diagnostic files. He had never seen this pattern before. I asked him what could produce it. He said nothing he knew about. The third case is the one in which a witness was physically present at the pump island at the moment the disappearance occurred. Her name is Darla Bickford, and the subject was her husband, Warren Bickford, age 57. They were long-haul owner-operators who drove as a team. They were in the sleeper berth rotation of their own Freightliner Cascadia on the night of July 10, 2017, somewhere between Council Bluffs, Iowa, and their delivery destination in Ogden, Utah. They were pulled into the Pilot Flying J Travel Center at exit 367 on Interstate 80 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, at approximately 3:40 in the morning. Warren was driving the shift. Darla was sleeping in the cab's sleeper berth. Warren pulled to the commercial fueling lane, set the parking brake, and climbed out of the cab. The rest of what I am about to describe comes from Darla's statement to the Laramie County Sheriff, which was taken at 6:18 in the morning on July 11th, approximately 2 hours after Darla woke up and discovered what had happened. Darla's statement was given while she was still in shock. She later reviewed and confirmed it twice, once in the presence of the sheriff and once in a follow-up interview with an FBI agent from the Denver field office. Her statement is consistent across all 3 versions. Darla woke at approximately 3:43 in the morning because she smelled fuel. She described the smell as strong enough to cut through her sleep. She described it as the particular sharp diesel smell she knew from 18 years in the cab with her husband, but closer than it should have been, and stronger. Ordinarily, the diesel smell at a fuel island was a faint background note she barely registered. This smell was inside the cab. Darla climbed from the sleeper berth to the cab's driver's seat and looked out the driver's side window. She saw the pump running. She saw the nozzle dangling from the fuel port of the driver's side fuel tank. She saw diesel pouring down the side of the truck and pooling on the concrete. She did not see Warren. She climbed out of the cab. She walked around the front of the truck. She called her husband's name. She walked to the passenger side of the truck. She walked around the back. She walked to the truck parked in the neighboring fueling lane and looked for her husband. She walked into the Pilot Flying J Travel Center, past a night clerk who did not look up, past the self-serve coffee bar, past the open bathroom door. She called for Warren. She walked into the men's restroom and called for him. The bathroom was empty. She walked back outside. At this point, the pump was still running. Darla approached the pump and stopped the transaction by pressing the red emergency stop button on the front of the dispenser. The pump went quiet. The diesel stopped flowing. The fueling lane was silent, except for the hum of the overhead halogens. Warren was still not there. Darla walked back inside the Pilot Flying J. This time the clerk looked up. Darla told him her husband had been fueling the truck outside and was no longer there. The clerks came out to the fueling lane with Darla. They looked around together. They walked the perimeter of the truck. They walked the perimeter of the adjoining lane. They walked to the edge of the parking lot. Warren was not anywhere they could see. The clerk called the Laramie County Sheriff. Darla sat on the driver's side footrail of her own tractor and waited. The deputy arrived at 4:22 in the morning. The pump log for that night, obtained by me through Pilot Flying J's corporate office under a subpoena initiated by Darla's attorney, shows the signature. Handle engagement at 3:40 and 12 seconds. Continuous flow lock at 3:40 and 16 seconds. Clip release at 3:40 and 31 seconds. No cradle return. Dispensing continues until Darla presses the emergency stop at 3:46 and 8 seconds. That is 6 minutes and 41 seconds of unattended fueling, during which the tank filled, the automatic shutoff tripped, and the continued overflow produced the pooling diesel that woke Darla with its smell. When the deputy pulled the surveillance footage, he was able to confirm Darla's account of walking around the truck and into the store. He was also able to confirm, by reviewing the fuel island camera from 3:40 and 0 seconds onward, that Warren walked to the pump, lifted the nozzle, inserted it into the tank, squeezed the handle, engaged the clip, and stood at the truck for approximately 15 seconds. At 3:40 and 31 seconds, the same frame interval as the pump log's clip release event, Warren Bickford was no longer in the camera's view. The truck was visible. The nozzle was visible in the fuel port. The clip was visible in the autoflow position, but Warren was not at the truck, and Warren was not walking away from the truck. Warren was not in the frame. Darla reviewed the footage at the sheriff's office at approximately 11 in the morning on July 11th. She watched it 3 times. She said to the deputy that she did not understand what she was seeing. The deputy said he did not either. Darla asked him where her husband had gone. The deputy said that Warren must have walked out of frame very quickly, and that somewhere on one of the other cameras there would be a record of him walking away. The deputy was wrong. The other cameras at the Pilot Flying J did not show Warren. The parking area camera showed the commercial lot with no human motion in the relevant interval. The store interior camera showed the night clerk at the register, not looking up. The exterior perimeter camera showed the truck stop's edge and the highway beyond it, with no pedestrian motion. Warren did not walk out of the fuel island. Warren was not captured on any surveillance after 3:40 and 31 seconds. Warren has not been found. The Laramie County Sheriff's investigation was active for 14 months, during which Darla Bickford was interviewed 11 separate times, and the Pilot Flying J Corporate Security Office released all available footage and logs without resistance. The case was transferred to the Cold Case Unit in September of 2018. It has not been reopened. Darla Bickford doesn't drive long haul anymore. She sold the Freightliner Cascadia in October of 2017, 3 months after Warren's disappearance. She said on the telephone in 2023 that she could not bear to ride in a truck alone. She has moved in with her sister in Cedar Rapids. She has not been to a Pilot Flying J since the night her husband disappeared. She still sometimes wakes up at 3 in the morning with the smell of diesel in her nose, even though she is nowhere near a fuel island and has not been in over 6 years. The smell is not real, she admits, but it is also not something she can wish away. The smell is what her body remembers about the night Warren did not come back. Darla was 120 feet from her husband when he disappeared. She was asleep. She did not see or hear anything unusual until the smell woke her. Whatever happened at the pump that night happened within earshot of a sleeping woman who heard nothing, and within the view of a commercial surveillance system that recorded it, but recorded it as an absence rather than an event. The 4th subject was a 39-year-old night shift intensive care nurse named Sarah Halloway, who disappeared from a 7-Eleven fuel island at exit 519 on Interstate 5 in Sacramento, California, on a Wednesday morning at 3:52 in the morning in October of 2022. Sarah was coming off a 12-hour shift at Mercy General Hospital. She had done the same drive 4 nights a week for 6 years. She knew the 7-Eleven because it was the only 24-hour fuel station on her route home, and she stopped there every shift night to fill up and buy a coffee before the final 23 miles to her apartment. The night shift clerk knew her by name. The coffee she bought was always the same. Medium Colombian blend. No sugar. 1 cream. The clerk had her coffee ready before she walked in. That was the routine. On the night of October 12th, Sarah walked in at 3:50 and ordered her usual. The clerk had it prepared. He took her card. She paid for the coffee and $35 at Pump 4 in advance because the 7-Eleven required prepayment for overnight fuel purchases. She walked out to her car, a 2019 Honda CR-V in gray, parked at the pump she had specified. She lifted the nozzle. She inserted it. She squeezed the handle. She engaged the autoflow clip. The pump dispensed gasoline for 11 seconds. Then the clip released. The nozzle stayed in the tank. The handle stayed open. The fuel kept flowing until the automatic shutoff tripped, and then continued to overflow until the transaction timeout expired. Sarah was not in the frame after the third of those 11 seconds. The clerk noticed the car still sitting at Pump 4 approximately 20 minutes later. He thought Sarah might have gone to the restroom. He checked the single unisex bathroom inside the 7-Eleven. It was empty. He called out her name in the store. He walked to her car. The car was unlocked. Her coffee was in the cup holder, still warm. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her cell phone was in the purse. He called the Sacramento police. A patrol unit arrived within 12 minutes. Sarah's phone record showed nothing after 3:48 in the morning, when she had sent a text message to her mother saying she was leaving the hospital and would call her from the car on the way home. The call did not happen. Sarah's mother, a woman named Deborah, had been in the habit of staying awake until Sarah called her from the car because she worried about her daughter driving alone in the dark after a long shift. That night, Deborah stayed awake until 5:30 in the morning. She tried to call Sarah's phone twice. Both calls went to voicemail. She assumed her daughter had fallen asleep at home without calling, which had happened twice before. At 6:15 in the morning, the Sacramento police called Deborah to tell her that her daughter's car had been found abandoned at a 7-Eleven with fuel still dripping from the nozzle. The 7-Eleven pump log showed the signature: handle engagement, continuous flow lock, clip release without cradle return, continued dispensing until the transaction maximum. The footage from the Fuel Island camera showed Sarah at the pump for a total of 11 seconds before she was not in the frame anymore. The interior store camera showed the clerk standing at the register, not looking up, for the entire interval. Sarah was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed approximately 118 pounds. She had been a nurse for 16 years. She had been engaged to a man named Scott for the past 3 years. They had been planning a wedding for the following May. Scott came to the police station at 7 in the morning after Deborah called him. He sat in the interview room and was told what the evidence showed. He asked if he could watch the footage. The detective, a woman in her 40s who had worked Sacramento property crime for 20 years and was not prepared for what the 7-Eleven surveillance was about to show her, played it for him. Scott watched it once. He asked her to play it again. He asked her if there was another camera that captured what happened in the moment Sarah left the frame. The detective said there was not. Scott asked her where Sarah had gone. The detective said she did not know. Scott did not ask anything else for several minutes. Then he asked if he could go home. The detective said yes. Sarah Halloway has been missing for 3 years and 4 months. Scott has not remarried. Deborah still wakes up at 3:30 in the morning because that was the time Sarah used to leave the hospital, and Deborah's body has not forgotten the routine of waiting for the call. The 5th case occurred at a Sheetz at exit 67 on Interstate 81 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on a Monday morning at 1:14 in the morning in April of 2021. The subject was a 33-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative named Thomas Whitestone, traveling home from a client dinner in Wilkes Barre, back to his residence in Arlington, Virginia. Thomas drove a 2020 Audi A6 sedan in dark gray. He had been on the road for roughly 2.5 hours when he pulled into the Sheetz. He had approximately 3/4 of a tank remaining, but stopped out of habit. Thomas was a nervous driver who did not allow his fuel level to drop below half. His former college roommate, Daniel Arian, who I interviewed 9 months after the disappearance, described Thomas as the kind of person who planned for contingencies. Thomas kept a spare phone charger in the glove compartment. Thomas kept a paper road atlas, even though he had GPS. Thomas kept the receipt for every fueling stop for his quarterly expense reports to his employer. At 1:13 in the morning, the Fuel Island camera captured Thomas parking at pump 7. At 1:14, he lifted the nozzle. At 1:14 and 4 seconds, he inserted the nozzle into the fuel port. At 1:14 and 7 seconds, the handle engagement event was logged. At 1:14 and 11 seconds, the continuous flow lock event was logged. At 1:14 and 22 seconds, the clip release event was logged. That is 15 seconds. Between the continuous flow lock event and the clip release event, 15 seconds, during which Thomas Whitestone was standing at his car, waiting for the tank to fill. The Fuel Island camera captured him standing there. It captured him in a dark gray suit jacket over a white shirt, tie loosened, his hair combed back in the style he had worn since his college graduation. It captured him for 11 of those 15 seconds. Then at 1:14 and 18 seconds, 4 seconds before the clip release event, the camera image did not contain Thomas. The Audi was there. The nozzle was there. The pump continued dispensing, but Thomas had left the frame during 1/30th of a second between one frame and the next. The sheet's pump log signature matched every other case. The sheet's fuel dispenser at pump 7 was a Gilbarco Encore 700 series, installed in 2019. The diagnostic log was preserved in the pump's internal memory. When I requested the log through Gilbarco's corporate data services in 2022, the file was still intact. The abort pattern was identical to the file from the Amarillo shell. It was identical to the file from the Flagstaff Chevron. It was identical to the file from the Cheyenne Pilot Flying J. Thomas Whitestone has not been found. His Audi was towed from the sheets the following morning and impounded at a storage facility in Harrisburg for the duration of the investigation. The vehicle was released to his family in June of 2021 and subsequently sold at auction. His wife, whose name is Rachel, attended the auction but did not bid. She could not own that car, she explained to me later. She had driven in it with Thomas many times, and the idea of it sitting in her driveway after he had left it for the last time at a gas station in Pennsylvania was more than she could accept. The car was purchased by a dealer and resold to a private buyer whose identity Rachel did not know and did not want to know. Rachel Whitestone now lives in her mother's house in Richmond, Virginia. She sold the home she had shared with Thomas in the summer of 2022. The house had been difficult in a way she did not expect. The difficulty was not the memories, although those were present, but the mail. The pharmaceutical company that had employed Thomas continued to send documentation to his home address for 2 years after his disappearance, because the company's human resources system had not been updated to reflect his status as missing. Rachel received quarterly performance reviews, continuing education certifications, and Christmas bonuses for a dead man, or for an absent man. She was careful to draw that distinction. She did not know that Thomas was dead. She knew that Thomas was gone, and she knew that the pharmaceutical company's bureaucracy had not accepted that gone and dead are different things, and that they required different kinds of paperwork. The sixth subject was a 48-year-old RV traveler named Linda Ackerman, who disappeared from a Wawa convenience store at exit 99 on Interstate 95 in Savannah, Georgia, at 2:41 in the morning on a Friday in August of 2023. Linda was a recently widowed woman who had, 3 months before her disappearance, sold the home she had shared with her late husband for 31 years and purchased a 2022 Winnebago Micro Mini travel trailer and a used Ford F-250 to tow it. The trip from Savannah to her daughter's house in Naples, Florida, was the 14th leg of a planned national tour Linda had mapped out after her husband's death. She had intended to visit every state capital over the course of 2 years. She had completed 11 state capitals before her disappearance at the Savannah Wawa. She had been documenting the trip on a private Facebook group shared with approximately 40 friends and family members. Her most recent post, made at 2:18 in the morning from the Wawa parking lot before she pulled into the fuel island, was a photograph of the Winnebago taken from her phone. The caption read that she was stopping for fuel and would be in Naples by lunchtime. The photograph showed the Winnebago against the lit Wawa canopy. The timestamp on the image file, which I examined when Linda's daughter Emily shared the photograph with me, was correct to within a few seconds. 23 minutes after Linda posted the photograph, she was no longer at the Wawa. She had refueled the Ford F-250, returned to the cab briefly to pay, walked back out to engage the autoflow clip on pump 5 for the second tank of the dual-tank F-250, and then, between one camera frame and the next, was not at the pump island. The Winnebago and the F-250 remained at the pump. The pump continued dispensing until the automatic shutoff tripped, and then continued overflowing until the transaction timeout. Linda's cell phone was in the center console of the truck. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the cup holder between the seats. She had left the engine off and the parking brake set. The truck was undisturbed. The RV was undisturbed. Everything about the scene was undisturbed except for the diesel on the concrete and the absence of Linda. Linda Ackerman's case was investigated by the Chatham County Sheriff's Office. The lead detective, a man named Curtis Mayfield, who is now retired, acknowledged to me by phone in 2024 that he had never worked a case like it. He described his initial theory as a medical emergency. He thought Linda must have had a stroke or cardiac event, walked away from the pump disoriented, and collapsed somewhere off camera. He had the entire Wawa property searched twice, the adjacent hotel parking lot searched, the wooded area behind the station searched, and the interstate shoulder in both directions checked. Nothing. No body. No disoriented elderly woman. No medical alert activation from any hospital or ambulance service in the Savannah metropolitan area. He then worked the hypothesis of a targeted abduction. He reviewed every vehicle that had approached and left the Wawa in the hour before and after Linda's disappearance. He identified each vehicle by plate. He interviewed each driver who could be located. None of them had seen Linda. None of them had behaved suspiciously. None of them fit any abduction profile. Curtis Mayfield described to me by phone in 2024 the 7 months he spent on Linda's case and how he had never closed it. He had transferred it to the cold case unit with a one-page summary that described the facts, but offered no conclusions. He had not slept well during the active investigation period, he acknowledged, and the case had contributed to his decision to retire a year early. When his daughter asked him what had bothered him so much about Linda Ackerman specifically, he said it was the photograph. The photograph Linda had posted to Facebook at 2:18, showing her RV against the Wawa canopy. The photograph that proved she had been there, happy, looking forward to seeing her daughter the next day. The photograph that was the last thing Linda Ackerman had ever created, and that sat in his case file as a piece of evidence he could not fit into any narrative. The seventh case took place at a BP at exit 442 on Interstate 80 in Omaha, Nebraska, in November of 2015. The subject was a 41-year-old commercial baker named Patrick Hollerin, who was on his way to the bakery where he had worked for 19 years. Patrick started his shift at 5 in the morning. He left his house in Papillion every morning at 3:45. He stopped at the same BP at exit 442 every Tuesday morning for fuel and a cup of coffee. He did this because his Chevrolet Silverado had a 24-gallon fuel tank that he refilled approximately every 7 days, given his commute and weekend driving, and Tuesday was the day he ran closest to empty. The Tuesday morning fueling stop was so routine that the BP's night manager, a woman named Gloria who had worked at that station for 11 years, counted Patrick's arrival at 4:04 in the morning as her weekly confirmation that her shift was almost over. On November 10th, 2015, Patrick pulled into the BP at 4:03 in the morning. He parked at pump 2. He walked into the store. He said good morning to Gloria. He bought a 20-ounce coffee and a glazed donut. He paid for them along with $30 of fuel at pump 2. He walked back outside. He removed the nozzle from pump 2. He inserted it in the Silverado's fuel port. He squeezed the handle. He engaged the clip. He took a bite of the donut. Gloria watched him do this through the store's front window because her register faced the fuel island, and she could see the pumps clearly. She saw Patrick take the bite of donut at 4:05 and 17 seconds because she was looking at the analog clock above the door, which was positioned in her line of sight next to the pump island, and she remembered the time. At 4:05 and 21 seconds, Patrick was no longer in her line of sight. Gloria told the investigators that she had blinked. She told them that her attention had shifted to the counter for a moment because a regular customer had walked in. She told them she did not see Patrick walk away. She told them that when she looked up again, the Silverado was at the pump was running, and Patrick was not there. She assumed he had gone to the restroom around the side of the building. She did not think anything of it. The pump continued dispensing. The Silverado's fuel tank filled. The automatic shutoff tripped. The overflow began. Gloria did not see the overflow because the angle of pump 2 from her register did not include the side of the vehicle where the fuel port was located. She saw the back of the Silverado only. She did not know the fuel was pouring on the ground for the next approximately 7 minutes until the transaction timeout expired and the pump stopped. She did not know anything was wrong until 4:17 in the morning when the day shift manager arrived to begin her shift and walked the lot before coming inside. The day shift manager saw the diesel on the concrete. She called Gloria out to look. Gloria looked at the Silverado. She looked at the pump. She looked at the empty driver's seat visible through the open driver's side door of the truck. She called 911 at 4:19 in the morning. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office responded within 7 minutes. The BP's surveillance footage was pulled within 30 minutes. The footage showed exactly what Gloria had described. Patrick walking to the truck. Patrick squeezing the handle. Patrick engaging the clip. Patrick taking a bite of the donut. And then, between one frame and the next, Patrick was not at the truck. The donut was on the ground 3 feet from where Patrick had been standing. The bite mark still visible. The glaze intact. The paper wrapper unfolded. Patrick had been holding the donut in his left hand when the camera frame shifted. The donut fell during the shift, or during some event that happened in the interval the camera could not resolve, and landed on the concrete near the pump pedestal. The coffee cup Patrick had been holding was also on the ground, approximately 2 feet from the donut. On its side, coffee pooled around it. The lid was still attached. The cup had not burst. It had fallen from the same height and at the same moment as the donut. The bakery's morning supervisor called the Silverado's cell phone at 4:45 in the morning because Patrick had not arrived for his shift, and he was never late. The phone was in the center console of the truck, and the call went to voicemail. The bakery supervisor drove to Patrick's house at 5:15 in the morning. Patrick's wife, Ellen, was just waking up. She was 7 months pregnant with their second child. Their 3-year-old son was asleep in his room. The supervisor told Ellen that Patrick had not come to work. Ellen called the BP at exit 442. The manager answered. She told Ellen to hold, then handed the phone to the Douglas County deputy who was on scene. Ellen Hollerin was taken to the BP in a family member's car at approximately 6 in the morning. She arrived to see her husband's truck cordoned off, pump 2 roped with yellow caution tape, and the puddle of diesel being absorbed by industrial absorbent granules spread across the concrete. She was allowed to look at the truck from outside the cordon. She was shown the photograph of the donut and the coffee cup on the ground. She did not understand what she was being asked to identify. The deputy told her that her husband had disappeared from the pump, that he had been on camera, and then not on camera, and that no witness had seen him leave. Ellen did not understand. The deputy said that they were reviewing every piece of footage from every camera on the property, and that they would find him. Patrick Hollerin was not found. The donut with the bite taken from it was entered into evidence because the sheriff initially considered the possibility that Patrick had choked on the donut and collapsed out of view. A forensic pathologist examined the donut, confirmed that the bite had been made by an adult human male, confirmed that the saliva DNA on the donut matched the sample Ellen provided from Patrick's razor, and noted that the size of the bite was consistent with a person who was eating normally and not choking. The donut did not help the investigation. The donut sat in an evidence locker in Omaha for 3 years before being released to Ellen, who did not know what to do with it. She did not throw it away. She put it in a Ziploc bag in a small box in her attic. Ellen admitted to me in 2021 that she still did not know what to do with the donut. Keeping a 9-year-old donut was strange, she said, and she did not care. The donut was the last thing her husband had touched before he was gone. She was not willing to lose it. Patrick's second child, a daughter named Jessica, was born in January of 2016, 2 months after her father disappeared. Jessica is now 9 years old. She has asked her mother where her father is several times over the years. Ellen's answers have varied depending on Jessica's age. The most recent version Ellen has given her daughter is the truth, which is that her father went to buy fuel one morning and did not come home, and that nobody knows what happened to him, and that she, Ellen, thinks about him every day, and that Jessica's birth was the hardest and most beautiful thing that had happened to her, and that Patrick would have been proud of his daughter beyond the capacity of language. Jessica has accepted this answer provisionally. She has asked at 9 whether she will ever find out what happened. Ellen has told her that she does not know. The 8th subject was a 28-year-old mother of 3 children named Rebecca Kinsley, who disappeared from a Love's travel stop at exit 138 on Interstate 30 in Little Rock, Arkansas, at 12:33 in the morning on a Sunday in September of 2018. Rebecca was driving home from her sister's house in Hot Springs. She had spent Saturday afternoon and evening with her sister and nephew, leaving her own children with her husband in their home in Cabot, Arkansas. She had planned to drive home Saturday night rather than stay over, because her youngest child, a 2-year-old named Owen, was teething and had difficulty sleeping without her. She had texted her husband at 10:45 in the evening from her sister's driveway, telling him she was leaving and would be home by 1. She had stopped at the Love's for fuel at approximately 12:30, parked at Pump 11, walked inside briefly to purchase a bottle of water and a package of almond crackers, returned to the vehicle, and begun refueling. The fuel island camera captured everything Rebecca did: opening the fuel port, lifting the nozzle, inserting it, squeezing the handle, engaging the clip, standing at the vehicle for approximately 12 seconds. The camera captured her in a light blue sweatshirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. She was holding the water bottle in her left hand. She had the crackers in her right jacket pocket. The camera captured her drinking from the water bottle for the first 6 of those 12 seconds. At 12:33 and 18 seconds, Rebecca lowered the water bottle. At 12:33 and 21 seconds, Rebecca was no longer in the frame. The water bottle was on the ground. Having fallen at the same moment, Rebecca was no longer at the vehicle. The water inside had not spilled because the lid was still on. The pump log at Love's Pump 11 shows the abort signature. The Love surveillance shows the abort event. The investigation by the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office was joined by the FBI's Little Rock field office within 24 hours, because Rebecca was a young mother with 3 children, and the profile warranted additional resources. The investigation has not produced a lead that has survived examination. Rebecca's husband, whose name is Mark, has raised their 3 children alone since that Sunday morning. The children were, at the time of the disappearance, 6 years old, 4 years old, and 2 years old. They are now 10 years old, 8 years old, and 6 years old. Owen, the youngest, was too young to form a permanent memory of his mother. He has seen photographs. He knows that his mother is gone and that no one knows where she went. He does not remember her voice. Mark has sometimes played voicemails Rebecca left on his phone, so Owen could hear her. Owen has listened. He has asked his father whether his mother is coming back. Mark has told him the truth, which is that he does not know. The 9th case I want to describe involved a 19-year-old college student named Daniel Prescott, who disappeared from a Circle K fuel island at exit 226 on Interstate 25 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at 2:08 in the morning on a Thursday in February of 2014. Daniel was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico. driving back to his dorm room from a long weekend with his family in Santa Fe. The drive from Santa Fe to Albuquerque is approximately 65 miles and takes just over an hour on Interstate 25. Daniel had left his parents' house at about 12:45 in the morning. He had eaten dinner with his family, watched a movie, and stayed later than he had planned, because his younger sister, a high school junior, had wanted to show him a short film she was making for a class assignment. Daniel had watched the film twice, given his sister feedback, and then realized he needed to start the drive because he had an organic chemistry exam at 9 in the morning. Daniel had a reserve of fuel in his 2013 Subaru Outback, which his parents had purchased for him when he started college. But he was in the habit of topping off at the halfway point of any trip over 50 miles. The Circle K at exit 226 was the halfway point. Daniel had stopped there 6 times previously on similar trips. He knew the station. The station's fuel dispensers were Bennett Pump Company units, not the Gilbarco or Wayne systems I had seen in most of the other cases. The Bennett pumps log the same diagnostic events as the Gilbarco and Wayne pumps. The nozzle activation, the handle engagement, the continuous flow lock, the clip release, the cradle return. The signatures are identical in format. In Daniel's case, the Bennett pump at Island 4 logged the abort signature at 2:08 and 14 seconds, handle engagement at 2:07 and 36 seconds, continuous flow lock at 2:07 and 41 seconds, clip release at 2:08 and 14 seconds, 33 seconds after the flow lock, no cradle return. Continued dispensing until the transaction timeout expired 4 minutes later. The fuel island camera at the Circle K had a known defect. The overnight clerk had reported the defect to the store manager 3 weeks before Daniel's disappearance, and the manager had logged it in the store's maintenance queue. The camera had a 2-second exposure lag during the transition from its low light mode to its standard mode, which was triggered when a vehicle's headlights entered the camera's field of view. During that 2-second lag, the camera recorded only blackness. The lag was not constant. It occurred only when a vehicle with particularly bright headlights pulled into the island. In Daniel's case, the camera lag occurred between 2:07 and 39 seconds and 2:07 and 41 seconds, which is exactly the interval during which the continuous flow lock event was logged. The camera recorded blackness. When the image resumed, Daniel was standing at the Subaru. He had the handle in his right hand. The clip was engaged. 3 seconds of footage show him in that posture. At 2:07 and 45 seconds, 4 seconds after the camera image resumed, Daniel was no longer in the frame. The Albuquerque police investigation included a forensic video consultant hired by Daniel's parents at a cost of approximately $12,000. The consultant, a woman who had previously worked for the FBI's Forensic Audio-Video Laboratory in Quantico, reviewed the Circle K footage frame by frame. She confirmed the camera lag was real. She confirmed that Daniel had appeared in the frame after the lag ended. She confirmed that Daniel was no longer in the frame 4 seconds later. She also confirmed, by reviewing the frame immediately before the transition, that there was no motion blur, no partial silhouette, no indication of Daniel being in the process of moving. Her written report stated that the disappearance of the subject between 2 consecutive frames, separated by 1/30th of a second, could not be accounted for by any mechanism of human motion available to a human body of Daniel's mass and physiology. Daniel was 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 160 pounds. Her report was entered into the case file. Her conclusions were noted. No action was taken on them. Daniel has now been missing for 11 years. His parents, Kevin and Paula, moved from Santa Fe to Albuquerque in 2017, in part because they wanted to be closer to the Circle K and the University of New Mexico, and in part because Kevin had been unable to work after Daniel's disappearance and needed a change. Paula still teaches high school English in Albuquerque. Kevin works for the city's parks department. They have 2 other children, both now adults with children of their own. Their younger daughter, the one who had shown Daniel her film the night he disappeared, is now 30 and a professional cinematographer in Los Angeles. She has not returned to visit the Circle K, Paula confided by phone in 2024 that she drives past the station approximately once a week because it is on the route to her church. She does not stop. She does not turn her head to look. She drives past, and she does the thing she has done for 11 years, which is count backward from 30 until she reaches the next block, and then the next block, and then home. The 10th subject was a 72-year-old grandmother named Helen Bartlett, who disappeared from a come-and-go fuel island at exit 131 on Interstate 80 in Des Moines, Iowa, at 11:47 in the evening on a Wednesday in May of 2016. Helen was driving her 36-foot Thor Ace motorhome from her winter residence in Surprise, Arizona, back to her summer cabin in northern Minnesota. She had made the drive 20 times over the course of her retirement. She enjoyed driving alone because she liked the time to think. She was in excellent health for her age. She had, 3 months before her disappearance, passed the driver's medical exam required by her insurance company for operators of recreational vehicles over 30 feet. Her doctor had described her blood pressure and cardiovascular function as consistent with someone 15 years younger. Helen pulled into the come and go at 11:44 in the evening. She had driven for 9 hours that day. She was approaching the midway point of her return trip and had planned to sleep in the motorhome overnight in the Come and Go's designated RV lot, which she had used twice before. The Come and Go at exit 131 has a fueling canopy with both passenger car pumps and one commercial pump suitable for RV tanks. Helen parked at the commercial pump. She walked into the store. She paid $60 in advance for fuel at the commercial pump. The store clerk, a man named Greg, who had been working overnight at that station for 6 years, remembered Helen because she had stopped there before. He chatted with her about the weather. She told him she was heading to Minnesota. He wished her a safe trip. She walked back out to the motorhome. She lifted the nozzle. She engaged the clip, and the camera lost her. Greg did not see her after that. The fuel island camera captured the abort sequence. The pump continued dispensing. The tank overflowed. Greg did not notice until approximately 20 minutes later, when he stepped outside to check on a customer who had been parked at the diesel pump longer than seemed necessary. That customer, a trucker, was having a cigarette break. Greg spoke with him briefly. On his way back to the store, Greg noticed that the Thor Ace was still at the commercial pump. He walked over to the motorhome. He saw the fuel on the ground. He called Helen's name. He looked inside the motorhome's cab. He saw no one. He opened the motorhome's side door, which was unlocked, and called inside. He walked through the motorhome. Helen was not there. Her keys were in the cup holder. Her purse was on the couch. Her reading glasses were on the small dining table. A paperback novel, open face down to the page she had last been reading, sat next to the glasses. The novel was a Mary Higgins Clark thriller. Helen had been on page 147. Greg called the Polk County Sheriff at 12:07 in the morning. The investigation that followed was thorough. Helen's family, which consisted of a son and daughter, both living in Minnesota, was notified at approximately 1 in the morning. Her son, a man named Gregory, who was named after his uncle and not the gas station clerk, drove to Des Moines overnight. He arrived at the Come and Go at approximately 9 in the morning. He went through the motorhome with a deputy, identifying his mother's belongings. He broke down when he found, in the bathroom of the motorhome, her toothbrush in the cup holder beside the sink, with toothpaste still on the bristles. She had intended to brush her teeth before bed. She had not gotten to it. She had instead gone outside first to refuel. Helen Bartlett has not been found. Gregory still owns the Thor Ace. He has kept it in a storage facility in Minnesota for 8 years. He has not driven it. He has not sold it. He explained by phone in 2024 that he goes to the storage facility approximately twice a year, pays the fee, and sits inside the motorhome for 30 minutes or so. He does not know why he does this. He does it anyway. The motorhome still smells slightly of his mother, he said, because she had used the same brand of laundry detergent for the sheets for 40 years, and the smell had worked into the fabric of the furniture. The day he could no longer smell her was the day he would sell the motorhome. So far, he can still smell her, faintly, in the couch cushions. So far, he does not sell it. The 11th case involved a 49-year-old woman named Charlotte Redgate, who disappeared from a TA travel center at exit 398 on Interstate 40 in Knoxville, Tennessee, at 3:20 in the morning on a Sunday in June of 2019. Charlotte was the wife of a long-haul trucker, and she had joined her husband for the final leg of his trip from South Carolina, back to their home in Missouri. This was something they did approximately 4 times a year. Charlotte would fly to her husband's pickup point, ride with him for 3 to 5 days, and either fly home from his final destination or ride all the way back with him, depending on how his route worked out. On this particular trip, she had met him in Charleston, ridden with him through Georgia and into Tennessee, and was scheduled to ride the rest of the way home to Missouri. Charlotte's husband, a man named Randall, was asleep in the sleeper berth of his Peterbilt 379. Charlotte was awake because she had not been able to sleep through the bumpy stretch of Interstate 40 through the mountains east of Knoxville. She had taken over driving briefly 2 hours earlier so that Randall could rest, but Randall had woken up and taken the wheel back at approximately 2:30 in the morning. He was now sleeping. Charlotte was sitting in the passenger seat, awake, reading on her phone. When Randall pulled into the TA to refuel, he had intended to handle the fueling himself and let Charlotte continue reading. Charlotte told him she would handle it because he had been driving for the past 2 hours and she was already awake. Randall climbed into the sleeper berth and fell asleep almost immediately. Charlotte got out of the cab and walked to the fuel island. What happened next is known from the pump log and from the fuel island camera. Charlotte lifted the nozzle. She engaged the handle and the clip. She was wearing a black windbreaker over a gray sweatshirt, jeans, and running shoes. She was carrying her phone in her left hand. She stood at the truck for approximately 9 seconds, looking at her phone. At 3:20 and 11 seconds, the camera image shifted, and Charlotte was no longer at the truck. Her phone was on the concrete. The screen was still on, displaying the social media feed she had been reading. Randall woke at approximately 4:40 in the morning. The Peterbilt was still at the fuel island. The pump was no longer running because the transaction had timed out. Randall did not initially understand why they were still at the station. He assumed Charlotte was inside the store using the restroom. He climbed out of the cab, stretched, and walked inside to find her. The overnight clerk, a woman in her 30s, looked up at him curiously. Randall asked her whether she had seen his wife. The clerk said she had not, although she had only been on shift since 3:30 in the morning. Randall described Charlotte. The clerk said she had not seen anyone matching that description. Randall walked the store. He walked to the women's restroom and knocked. No answer. He pushed the door open. Empty. He went back outside. He walked around the truck. He looked under the truck. He looked in the sleeper berth in case Charlotte had climbed back in while he was asleep. She had not. He walked the perimeter of the fuel island. He saw his wife's phone on the concrete. Randall picked up the phone. The screen was dim, but on. His face was registered as her unlock. He swiped in. The most recent activity was a social media feed scroll that had ended at 3:20 and 9 seconds in the morning. He did not understand what he was looking at. He went back inside the store and asked the clerk to call the police. The Knox County Sheriff arrived within 12 minutes. The pump log was pulled within the hour. The fuel island surveillance was pulled by the deputy, while Randall sat in the cab of the Peterbilt and did not speak. He watched the footage later, at the sheriff's office around 7 in the morning. He watched his wife lift the nozzle, engage the clip, stand there reading her phone, and then not be there. He did not ask for the footage to be replayed. He watched it once. He did not cry. He did not speak for a long time. Eventually, he said to the deputy that he had been asleep. The deputy told him that there was nothing he could have done, that based on the footage, whatever had happened had taken less than 1/30th of a second, and that being awake would not have made a difference. Randall said he understood what the deputy was saying. He said he still thought he should have been awake. Charlotte Redgate has been missing for 6 years. Randall retired from long haul, driving 8 months after her disappearance. He sold the Peterbilt. He lives in their home in Missouri, which has not changed significantly since Charlotte's disappearance. He still keeps her toothbrush in the bathroom. He still washes her clothes on the schedule she used to keep once every 2 weeks, because she had always preferred her clothes not sit in the hamper long. He knows she is not coming home. He does not think about it in those terms. He thinks about the clothes. He thinks about the toothbrush. He thinks about the schedule. The 12th and final case in this investigation occurred at a Maverick convenience store at exit 307 on Interstate 15 in Salt Lake City, Utah, at 1:56 in the morning on a Wednesday in August of 2022. The subject was a 31-year-old software engineer named Vivian Harper, who was traveling alone on a road trip from her apartment in Boise, Idaho, to a friend's wedding in Denver, Colorado. The drive is approximately 750 miles and is typically split over 2 days. Vivian had begun her drive the previous afternoon and had chosen to drive through the night rather than stop for a hotel because she preferred the lower traffic and cooler temperatures of overnight driving. She had stopped at the Maverick for fuel and a cup of coffee. She had parked her Subaru Impreza at Pump 7. She had walked inside the store, purchased coffee and a protein bar, and paid $30 in advance for fuel. She had walked back out. She had lifted the nozzle and engaged the handle. The Fuel Island camera at the Maverick captured Vivian for a total of 14 seconds before the camera image no longer contained her. At the moment she disappeared, she was wearing a black athletic jacket, gray leggings, and hiking boots. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail. She was holding the coffee cup in her left hand. The coffee cup, like Patrick Hollerin's coffee cup in Omaha, landed on the ground at the moment Vivian was no longer at the pump. The coffee spilled on the concrete. The protein bar, which had been in her right jacket pocket, was found in her pocket when her jacket was later recovered. Her jacket was not recovered at the Maverick. Her jacket was recovered in a place I will describe shortly. The pump log shows the signature. The fuel overflowed. The transaction timed out. The Maverick clerk noticed the Subaru at approximately 2:40 in the morning during a walk-around inspection of the property. The Salt Lake City police responded within 9 minutes. The investigation was standard through the first 48 hours. Vivian's family was notified. Her Subaru was impounded and searched. Her phone, which had been in the Subaru's center console, was analyzed. Her social media and email were examined. Nothing suggested a planned departure, a romantic relationship under stress, a financial problem, or any other conventional predictor of voluntary disappearance. Then, approximately 6 weeks after the disappearance, on a Saturday morning in October of 2022, a homeowner in a residential neighborhood in Laramie, Wyoming, approximately 440 miles northeast of the Maverick on Interstate 15, called the Laramie police to report that she had found a woman's black athletic jacket on her front porch. The jacket was folded. It was placed neatly on her porch bench. It had a Boise County Coroner's office tag on it, which made no sense because the Boise County Coroner had not issued any such tag. She did not know how the jacket had come to be on her porch. She did not know anyone in Boise. She did not know anyone in Laramie. The jacket had not been there the previous evening when she had watered her plants. It had been there when she opened her front door at 7 in the morning to get the newspaper. The Laramie police responded. They collected the jacket. They found the protein bar still in the right pocket. They found a hair follicle caught in the zipper. The hair was sent for DNA analysis. The DNA matched Vivian Harper. The case file on Vivian's disappearance, which had been active with the Salt Lake City Police Department, was cross-referenced with the Laramie police report. The Boise County Coroner's tag on the jacket was, on closer examination, not an actual coroner's tag. It was a piece of plain white cardstock with the words Boise County Coroner's Office printed on it, in what appeared to be a basic inkjet printer font. The tag had been tied to the zipper with a piece of ordinary white string. The tag contained no case number, no identifying information, no date, just the title of an office, which is not an office that typically tags items belonging to missing persons. The jacket had been handled with care. It was folded along standard fold lines. The protein bar was intact. The zipper was fully zipped. The sleeves were tucked. There was no evidence of violence. There was no evidence of blood. There was no evidence of any substance that would indicate the jacket had been on a human body, after the moment it was recovered at the Maverick Fuel Island 46 days earlier. The DNA found in the jacket matched only Vivian Harper. There was no secondary DNA on the jacket, no fingerprints other than Vivian's, no fibers that did not match the Subaru's interior. The jacket had been folded, tagged, and placed on a stranger's porch in Wyoming, and nobody could explain how it got there. Vivian Harper has not been found. The jacket remains in evidence at the Salt Lake City Police Department's property room. The Laramie homeowner, whose name is Sharon and who is now 75 years old, confided in the fall of 2024 that the jacket had changed her life. She had not slept through the night since the morning she found it. She had installed security cameras on her property that week, and a motion-activated light on her porch, and a reinforced deadbolt on her front door, and all of these were ineffective against her fear, because none of them would detect whatever had placed the jacket on her porch without triggering the dog, who had slept through the night. Sharon's dog, a 12-year-old lab mix, had not barked. The dog had not approached the porch. The dog, which in 15 years had reliably alerted Sharon to any movement on her property, had slept through whatever had placed Vivian Harper's jacket on the porch 6 weeks after Vivian's disappearance in a different state. That is the 12th case. That is where the pattern sits in the data. I want to address now a question that has come up in every conversation I have had with a surviving family member of one of these subjects. The question is whether there are witness observations from any of the 12 cases that describe what happened in the moment of disappearance. The answer is that there are 4 witness observations across the 12 cases, none of which are consistent with each other, and all of which are either so brief or so ambiguous that they cannot be treated as evidence of a specific mechanism. The first witness observation is Darla Bickford's description of the smell of gasoline that woke her. The gasoline was diesel, and it was her husband's fuel pouring onto the concrete. The smell is explicable. It is not a description of the disappearance itself. The second witness observation came from a passing motorist at the Flagstaff Chevron, where Margaret Ellison disappeared. The motorist, a man driving east on Interstate 40, described seeing what he called a bright flash in the direction of the Chevron at approximately the time of Margaret's disappearance. He described the flash as brief, brighter than a camera flash, and not accompanied by any sound he could identify through his closed truck window. He stated he had thought at the time it might have been a photography flash from someone in the Chevron parking lot. He had not reported the observation to anyone until a news story about Margaret's disappearance ran 6 months later, at which point he called the Coconino County Sheriff. His observation was logged. It was not pursued because he could not identify the source of the flash, and no other witness reported seeing it. The third witness observation came from a couple staying at a Motel 6 immediately adjacent to the Come and Go in Des Moines, where Helen Bartlett disappeared. The couple had been sitting outside their ground floor room at approximately 11:45 at night, smoking cigarettes and looking at the fuel station's canopy, because the bright canopy lights made conversation easier. The wife described seeing a brief brightening of the air in the vicinity of the commercial pump, which she described as a small column of light about 6 feet tall, visible only for a fraction of a second, with no source she could identify. Her husband said he had not seen it. He said she had been looking toward the canopy while he had been looking at her. The wife said she did not know what to make of her observation. The Polk County deputy who took her statement noted that she was a credible witness, an elementary school teacher with no history of mental illness, no medication, no drugs, and no alcohol at the time of the observation. He logged the statement. He did not know what to do with it. The fourth witness observation came from the overnight clerk at the 7-Eleven, where Sarah Halloway disappeared. The clerk, a man named Kevin who had worked at the 7-Eleven for 4 months, told the Sacramento police that he had heard what he described as a low humming tone for approximately 3 seconds at the time of Sarah's disappearance. The humming tone, he said, was not mechanical, not consistent with the 7-Eleven's refrigeration units, and not consistent with any sound he recognized. He said the humming had made the inside of his sinuses itch briefly and had stopped. He said he had not connected the humming with Sarah's car sitting at the pump until the police asked him. Kevin's statement was recorded. No technical analysis was performed on it because no audio recording captured the sound. 4 witness observations: a smell of fuel, a flash of light, a column of brief brightness, a brief humming tone. Each observation by a different witness. Each observation at a different location. Each observation consistent with the timing of a disappearance. None of them matching each other. All of them lacking corroboration from other witnesses or from available recording technology. What these observations have in common is that all 4 describe a brief phenomenon of small physical scale, limited duration, and ambiguous source. None of them describes a human figure. None of them describes a vehicle approaching. None of them describes a struggle. None of them describes the subject in the moment of disappearance, because the subject was not visible to any of these witnesses. What the witnesses saw or heard or smelled was, at most, the edge of something they could not identify, and the edge was close enough to them that it registered but far enough away that they could not examine it. I have considered, over the past 4 years of working on these cases, a long list of conventional explanations for the pattern I have described. I want to walk through them in order and explain why each one fails against the documented evidence. The first conventional explanation is coordinated human abduction, a sophisticated network of offenders using interstate fuel stations as targets. This explanation fails immediately against the pump log evidence. The pump logs show the abort sequence across 12 different fuel dispenser models, 3 different manufacturers, 8 different states, and 5 different retail chains over a span of 9 years. No human trafficking organization operates across that geographic and temporal scope without generating any law enforcement trail. No criminal enterprise uses a technique that leaves forensic evidence nobody can explain. Criminal enterprises use techniques that are known, repeatable, and hideable. They do not use techniques that produce evidence signatures no engineer at the manufacturer can reproduce. And they do not leave folded jackets with fake coroner tags on strangers' porches in other states. The second conventional explanation is voluntary disappearance. The subjects walked away from their vehicles of their own accord for their own reasons. This explanation fails against multiple evidentiary elements. The subjects include a pregnant woman waiting for her husband, a mother of 3 children under 7, a 64-year-old retired nurse calling her husband to say she would be home in an hour, a 72-year-old grandmother heading home for the summer, and a 28-year-old nurse who had a routine her mother knew down to the minute. The pattern of the subjects does not match any profile of voluntary disappearance. Additionally, the surveillance evidence in every case shows the subject in the process of fueling at the moment of disappearance, not walking away from the fuel island. People who voluntarily disappear do not abandon functioning vehicles with personal effects inside while actively engaged in an ongoing transaction. And people who voluntarily disappear do not trigger abort signatures in pump diagnostic systems that field engineers cannot explain. The third conventional explanation is medical emergency, a sudden cardiac event, stroke, seizure, or other incapacitation that caused the subject to fall out of the camera's view and collapse somewhere off-frame. This explanation fails against the camera evidence. The disappearances occur between one frame and the next. A person having a medical emergency falls over the course of multiple frames. A person collapsing onto a concrete pad is visible across at least 4 consecutive frames before reaching the ground, based on standard gravitational fall time from standing height to a horizontal position. None of the 12 cases shows a subject in the process of falling. The subjects are simply not in the next frame. Additionally, the property searches in every case covered not only the fuel island, but the entire property, the adjacent properties, and in most cases the nearby roadside ditches and wooded areas. No bodies have been recovered. No medical alerts have been triggered. No hospitals in the relevant metropolitan areas have admitted an unidentified person matching the subject's description during the relevant time window. The fourth conventional explanation is a sophisticated fuel theft operation in which the subject is forcibly removed from the fuel island by an accomplice, while a second party tampers with the pump to mask the theft. This explanation fails for several reasons. No fuel was stolen in any of the 12 cases. The fuel at each station dispensed into the subject's vehicle's fuel tank until the automatic shutoff, and then overflowed onto the concrete until the transaction timed out. All of the fuel dispensed was paid for, either by prepayment or by post-payment authorization, at the normal transaction price. If the goal of the operation had been fuel theft, the operation would have produced fuel theft. It did not produce fuel theft. It produced the disappearance of the person holding the pump handle, while the pump continued dispensing fuel the person had already purchased. The fifth conventional explanation is electromagnetic pulse, or targeted electronic interference, that disabled the surveillance and the subject simultaneously. This explanation fails against the diagnostic evidence. Every other electronic system at every one of the 12 fuel stations continued functioning through the moment of disappearance. The point-of-sale systems recorded transactions. The building's security system logged normal activity. The convenience store coolers, the coffee machines, the ceiling lights, the self-serve ice cream dispensers, the lottery terminal, the camera recording the store interior, and the pump cycle log itself all continued to function. The only thing that interacted with the event was the specific fuel island camera, which experienced a loss of frame during the interval the subject was disappearing. And even that loss was not a camera malfunction, because the camera recorded the frame before and after the disappearance. It simply did not record the disappearance itself, because the disappearance occurred faster than the frame capture rate. No electromagnetic pulse selectively interacts with one camera's exposure window while leaving every other electronic system in the building fully functional. The sixth conventional explanation is that the subjects were abducted by ultra-sophisticated aerial vehicles, perhaps military drones, operating outside the camera's field of view, using some form of extraction technology that exceeded the frame rate. This explanation fails for 3 reasons. First, no military drone technology currently known or suspected by open-source intelligence is capable of extracting a human body from a standing position in less than 1/30th of a second without either catastrophic trauma or forensic evidence. Second, the disappearances occurred at commercial fuel stations under fuel canopies, many of them metal-roofed, which would interfere with any aerial extraction technology. Third, the sound signature of a hypothetical extraction vehicle operating at low altitude over a fuel station would be heard by clerks inside the store, customers at other pumps, and residents of adjacent buildings. No such sound has been reported in any of the 12 cases. Each of these explanations fails at one or more of the forensic anchors. I have now walked through 12 cases, 4 witness observations, and 6 conventional explanations. The conventional explanations do not accommodate the evidence. The evidence accommodates no conventional explanation I have been able to construct, which leaves in the place where a conclusion should be a set of observations and a question I cannot answer. The observations are these. 12 subjects have disappeared from fuel islands on interstate exits across the United States over a 9-year period. Each disappearance occurred between one frame and the next of commercial surveillance footage. Each disappearance occurred while the subject was actively engaged in fueling a vehicle. Each disappearance produced a pump diagnostic log signature that cannot be reproduced by any known mechanism of fuel dispenser failure. In one case, a witness who was asleep 120 feet from the event was woken not by sound, but by the smell of fuel pouring from an abandoned nozzle. In another case, a witness 300 feet away reported a brief flash of light she could not account for. In another case, a witness inside the store reported a brief humming tone that made her sinuses itch. In another case, a jacket belonging to a subject was discovered, folded and tagged with a false official label on the porch of a stranger's home in a different state 6 weeks after the disappearance. No subject has been recovered. No forensic evidence consistent with a human offender has been identified. No conventional explanation has been able to hold against the combined weight of the pump logs, the camera evidence, and the aftermath patterns. The question I cannot answer is what produces these events. I have tried, for 4 years, to construct an explanation. I have consulted with 3 fuel dispenser engineers, 2 forensic video analysts, an electrical engineer specializing in electromagnetic phenomena, and a retired FBI special agent who spent his career on unexplained disappearances in rural America. None of them has offered an explanation that accommodates the full evidence. Each has pointed out pieces of the pattern that do not fit any known category. The fuel dispenser engineers cannot explain the pump logs. The video analysts cannot explain the frame-to-frame disappearances. The electrical engineer cannot explain the simultaneous survival of every other electronic system at each scene. The FBI agent cannot place these cases inside any offender profile he worked with in his 32-year career. What remains is the pattern, the pump logs, the camera footage, the witness observations, and the absence of 12 people whose families are waiting for answers. The current investigative framework cannot produce. I want to describe in more detail what the evidence does support, because saying what cannot be true is easier than saying what can be. The pump log signature is real. It has been confirmed by 3 independent manufacturer engineers. It has been reproduced in its formal structure across 12 separate incidents spanning 9 years, 12 states, and 5 retail chains. The signature is not a known failure mode. The signature is not consistent with user error, with equipment degradation, with software bugs, with power fluctuations, or with any known attack vector against fuel dispenser firmware. The signature also requires the continued depression of the pump handle after the clip release, which requires force of approximately 8 to 12 pounds, which is within the range of human grip strength, but is not within the range of passive equipment behavior. Something held those handles. The dispenser manufacturers cannot identify what. The camera footage at every site also captures the frame before and the frame after the disappearance, but not the disappearance itself, which requires an event that exceeds the camera's frame capture interval. At 30 frames per second, the frame capture interval is approximately 33 milliseconds. Whatever removes the subject in a duration shorter than 33 milliseconds. For comparison, the fastest documented human movement, a trained sprinter's reaction time from starting gun to first step, is approximately 140 milliseconds. The disappearance event is approximately 4 times faster than the fastest voluntary human motion, executed on a human subject who was not in a posture of anticipating motion. I consulted a retired FBI special agent named Robert Staffler in the summer of 2023. Staffler spent 32 years with the Bureau, the last 14 of those years in the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, which maintains the Bureau's database of unusual homicides, missing persons cases, and unexplained disappearances. I sent Staffler the full case files for the 12 subjects. I gave him access to the pump logs, the camera footage, and the witness statements. I did not share my conclusions. I asked him to read the material and to identify what pattern, if any, he saw. He took 4 months. He returned to me in the fall of that year with a written summary that I have kept in my case file. His summary was approximately 6 pages long. He offered no explanation for the pattern. He confirmed that the pattern was real. He stated that in his 32-year career, he had never encountered an unexplained disappearance sequence that included all of the following elements simultaneously, and he listed them. Synchronized surveillance absence across multiple independent camera systems at the moment of disappearance. Verified diagnostic logging in infrastructure other than surveillance. Consistent physical signature across disparate manufacturers and retail chains. Witness reports of edge phenomena with ambiguous source descriptions. No secondary forensic evidence suggesting human offender presence. No recovered subjects. No bodies. No secondary sightings. No electronic traces of the subjects after the disappearance event. Staffler's summary concluded that what I had documented was, to the best of his knowledge, the first properly documented sample of a specific phenomenon that had historically been scattered across dozens of unrelated cold case files in individual jurisdictions, and that had never been compiled because the pump diagnostic evidence had never been available for cross-reference. He recommended that I continue collecting cases. He did not offer a theory about what produces them. He told me that he had, over the course of his career, learned to distinguish between cases he could not solve and cases that had not been solvable by the available methodology. He placed the 12 cases in the second category. Staffler also told me something else, which I have thought about a great deal. He told me that the Bureau's historical treatment of patterns like this one is to hold them internally without public acknowledgement, because public acknowledgement generates speculative theories that complicate the investigation. He told me that the Bureau's current treatment of patterns like this one is to decline to review them at all, because the Bureau's jurisdictional framework requires a predicate offense, and a predicate offense requires evidence of a human perpetrator. In the absence of a human perpetrator, the Bureau does not open a case. The local agencies that do investigate these events do not have the resources, the jurisdictional reach, or the cross-referencing capability to see them as a pattern. The result is institutional invisibility. The pattern occurs. The evidence is produced. No agency is structured to see it. I want to add something about why these events may have been invisible to the public until now. The structural reason, as I described earlier, is that pump diagnostic logs are not in the standard investigative kit of local law enforcement. But there is a second reason. Fuel station disappearances do not generate the same cultural attention as, for example, disappearances from national parks or wilderness areas. A person missing in a forest prompts stories. A person missing at a gas station does not, because gas stations are the definition of civilization. Gas stations are lit, surveilled, populated, and mundane. People are not supposed to disappear from gas stations. When they do, the absence is treated locally, investigated locally, and closed locally, and the possibility that the same event is happening across multiple states is not considered, because the frame of reference for gas station crime is the frame of reference for gas station robbery. This is an abduction by stranger. This is a known offender profile. This is a surveillance identifiable event. The working assumption of every investigating agency is that a known type of crime has been committed, and that the evidence will eventually point to an offender. The evidence, in these 12 cases, does not point to an offender. The evidence points to a physical phenomenon that does not fit the categories available to the investigating agencies. This investigation is not going to bring Evan Chadwick home. It is not going to bring Margaret Ellison home, or Warren Bickford, or Sarah Halloway, or Thomas Whitestone, or Linda Arian, or Patrick Hollerin, or Rebecca Kinsley, or Daniel Prescott, or Helen Bartlett, or Charlotte Redgate, or Vivian Harper. It is not going to identify what produces the pump log abort signature. It is not going to tell me what held the pump handle open after the clip was released, or what closed the handle after the pump cycle ended, or what folded the jacket on a porch in Wyoming 6 weeks after a disappearance in Utah. What this investigation is going to do, if I have done it correctly, is place the pattern into the public record. When the pattern is in the record, the agencies that should have been examining it will no longer be able to say they did not know. When the agencies know and still choose not to act, the families will at least have the dignity of knowing the choice was made, rather than the comfort that the pattern simply had not been noticed. That is what I can offer. It is not much. It is what I have. If you have ever pulled into a gas station alone in the small hours of the morning and stepped out of your car and felt something wrong in the lit concrete under the canopy that you could not name, the comments below are open. If you know of a case that fits this pattern and that I have not included in this investigation, leave a comment describing it. I read every comment. The pattern I have described is based on 12 identified cases. The sample size of interstate off-ramp fuel stations in the United States operating overnight is in the hundreds of thousands. There are almost certainly more cases than I have found. If you know someone who drives long distances at night, which includes every long-haul trucker in the United States, every traveling nurse, every road tripper, every person who has ever filled up at 3 a.m. between destinations. Share this investigation with them, not to frighten them. The rate of disappearance of this specific type across the entire American interstate fuel network has been approximately 1 1/3 cases per year for the duration I have documented. The statistical risk to any individual traveler is vanishingly small. I am not telling you to stop fueling overnight. I am telling you because I think this audience is made up of people who can be trusted with the actual data, that the pattern I have described is real, and that it has not been addressed by any agency with jurisdiction, and that the evidence for it is available in diagnostic logs that investigators would have to know to request before they could analyze. The first step toward addressing it is knowing it exists. Subscribe to this channel. There will be more investigations. There are other patterns. There are other agencies that have not been looking. I am Echo 7. I read pump logs. I read camera frames. I read the absences where people are supposed to be. I will see you in the next one.